Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bianca Narenberg. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Bianca Narenberg. I'm currently serving as the volunteer president of the Oregon Right to Life Education Foundation. And it's my pleasure to be here to introduce some very wonderful speakers. We are going to have 3 speakers on this panel discussion entitled Abortion. Been there, done that, regret it, now what? And each of the 3 speakers today has a personal abortion experience. They have also experienced the healing after abortion and transformed their lives now to where they have a message of hope to give and to share with others. And I think their personal stories have overlapped. And I don't want to take any more of their time. We're going to begin with Lori Eckstein. And she participated in a Rachel's Vineyard retreat in 2000. The retreat was a pivotal time in her life. And she's gone on now to become very active in the post-abortion healing work in Oregon. So, Lori, please, we're looking forward to what you have to share with us.
I would like to start with that first question. Been there? Because I want to talk about who's been there. And the answer to that is pretty broad. First of all, those of us in front of you, myself and Graham and Tamara, some of you out there, and people that you know and love, as well as 35 Oregonians that lost their life today to abortion. So it's going on and on. But who else? So the who else is answered by, first of all, talking about what a crisis pregnancy is, because that's the critical point in life or death for these children and for the woundedness to the mother and the father and to the other significant people. So a crisis pregnancy is when someone significant in a woman's life expresses that having the baby is not a good thing. She may personally be the one that thinks it's not a good thing. She's convinced for some reason. But the weight of the crisis is always on the woman herself. So there are numerous fears that are involved. There's confusion. There's also power that's involved. Who has power in the situation? So considering the power people and the other types of pressures. So let's begin then with understanding more about why women do have abortions. They feel these immense pressures even if they're not aware of them. They feel alone, and often it's an act of despair. A few of those pressures include, and the overt, there's 2 categories. There's the overt and then there's the subtle pressures. So the overt pressures are coercion, threats of abandonment, and even being physically dragged into the abortion clinic. The subtle ones include feelings of helplessness, rejection, shame, low self-esteem, overpopulation guilt, and other societal theories, and also the silence of those suffering the unresolved trauma of abortion. The thousands and thousands of people, of women who don't share their story and aren't even in touch with their own trauma. So that silence has protected the truth from being known. And oftentimes women who've had abortions will say it's no big deal when they're given advice. If a young person or a family member comes to them, they'll just say it was no big deal, and that, go ahead, that's an easy solution for you. But I want to read you a story about a woman who got lots of advice. She sought lots of advice before she made her decision. Her name is Colleen. I was 18 and dating a man my parents strongly disapproved of, so they made a deal with me that they would send me to college if I would break up with him. I agreed, though I never really meant to keep my end of the bargain. I realized I was pregnant when the smells from the chemistry class kept making me sick. A friend convinced me to go to her doctor in town. He diagnosed pregnancy immediately, saying, "Such a shame, another young one." He told me not to worry, that it would be taken care of. He never once said anything about keeping the baby, but gave me a card for the local abortuary. Although I had no strong religious convictions, the visit to the clinic for my initial consultation left me feeling bad. The nurse told me to come back in a week with the money to have it done. I had heard some things about abortion, and I knew it was probably wrong. So that whole week I talked with friends and teachers looking for advice. One female teacher in particular advised me to have it done. She told me that she had had several abortions, that it was nothing, and that I didn't need this trouble in my life right now. No one, at any time, told me anything about adoption or keeping the child. In fact, one of my teachers was a nun, and I approached her too with my problem. I think now I really wanted someone to say, no, don't do it. But even the nun told me that abortion was the best route for me. My boyfriend didn't have the money, so my parents volunteered to pay for it. When I broke down in front of them saying that I thought it was wrong to do this, they told me they would kick me out of the house if I didn't have the abortion. They told me that if I had the baby, I would be completely on my own. I felt like there was absolutely no way I could escape the inevitable. When the time came, my boyfriend and some friends from school went with me. There were no protesters, no pro-life people. In fact, during the whole time of this crisis, I never heard a word about or from the pro-life side. I was led to a room with a whole group of girls just like me, waiting to have their babies killed. No one talked. No one looked at anyone else. They called our names one by one. I was very scared, mostly of the pain they said I might feel. With the counselor, I mostly cried. But she just agreed with everyone I had talked to. Yes, this is a bad time to have a child. Yes, you're too young. Yes, having a child costs a lot of money. Yes, it would be so hard for you to raise a child on your own. Yes, this is the best thing to do. Waiting to have my name called, I tried to convince myself of these things. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with. Abortion crosses all boundaries of age, profession, and economic strata. We have served women in the program that I work with called Rachel's Vineyard that are age 17 to 92. Those who have attended a retreat include teachers and nurses and other medical health fields, librarians, professional counselors, accountants, secretaries, college students, top-level management, service workers, artists, athletes, parish staff, part-time employees, and those whose lives have been so wounded by abortion and perhaps additional traumas that they are unable to maintain any stability such as a job. It's not unusual for us to have a retreatant who is living on the street. Surveys at abortion mills have shown that 70% of women choosing abortion believe abortion to be morally wrong. Statistics gathered at abortion mills claim that Catholic women abort as often as women from the general public do. So that is the answer to who. Who's been there? It could be any of us. It could be all of us. I would like to share another story with you in follow-up to those who have a moral belief and a Christian belief about abortion, who then are faced with the abortion decision and follow through with it. This woman says, a sword pierces my heart each time I hear the word abortion, see a pro-life billboard, hear a pro-life speaker at Mass, or read an article about abortion. I would repeat to myself that I was a murderer and counted myself among the wicked for taking the life of my unborn child. It was my hidden secret. Who could I tell? What would they say? Who would understand the pain or help me to cope with it? I felt alone, but knew I needed to do something. The wound was affecting all my relationships with myself, God, and others. My self-condemnation was leading me to the edge of suicide. I attended Mass with my family, but never felt worthy to be there because of the heavy guilt and shame. Those who are sharing these stories that I've read, and Tamara and Graham and myself in sharing our stories, the story doesn't end there. There's the ongoing regret and the symptoms that we lived with for many years, And then in the end, there is healing that was offered to us and that we embraced. We're still always on a healing journey. But I'm inviting each one of them to come forward and tell their stories now. And then I'll tell a little bit about our ministry and what we do for helping people to heal.
Thank you all for being here, first of all. Because getting the message out means having somebody to give the message to. So we appreciate you guys being here. My name's Graham. I'm 56. I'm obviously a man. Married for the second time, almost 21 years, coming up here in June. And way back when I was unmarried and 22, and my partner was 18, we were part of the WHO, the Been There. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And so there is no confusion as far as I'm concerned. Emotional recovery after abortion is a critical thing for men and women. So please understand that one. So you might be wondering what a man could possibly know about abortion, about the grief and the emotional issues associated with abortion, and about the recovery from that. The answer is I had an abortion, and I have been in recovery since 2007. If you believe, as I do, that pregnancy is a we circumstance, we are pregnant, then hopefully you'll come to believe that abortion is a we decision, or should be one. And if you don't, then I hope you come to a different thought somewhere along the way. And a question I am often asked is, why do I tell this story? And the answer is that both parents are impacted by an abortion, without question. Possibly both partners were involved in the decision, possibly not. Maybe just the woman has made the decision and the father doesn't know until much, much later, if at all. But ultimately, both parties will experience grief and need emotional healing. And as far as my personal been there, in 1975 or so, I answered the phone one sunny or Saturday rainy morning, and my girlfriend of about 2 years was calling. So far, nothing unusual, except she was calling from the doctor's office when I come pick her up. I thought, something's up here. So surprised, I asked her if she was okay. She started crying. Her answer was something like, "Yes, I'm fine, just come get me." Which I did, and you can probably guess how the rest of my morning went. And we found ourselves in that awkward place. I was 22, she was 18. I was a poorly performing college student at the time. She was a high school grad working part-time. She knew that I did not particularly want children. I knew that she was actually looking forward to a large family, but that didn't impact our other decisions that led us to where we were. We were not married, nor were we engaged. We were just there, and suddenly we were pregnant. The done that part, by the time she'd come home from the doctor's office, she already had acquired information about abortion services and clinics, and had already decided to, quote, take care of it. To my detriment, I did not attempt to talk her out of that decision at all. I did not suggest that we get married. I did not try to stop her make any other decision. I went so far as to lie to my employer to get the day off to drive there, and ultimately paid for the procedure. So in the short span from a Saturday morning to a Wednesday in 1975, we had gone from learning that we were pregnant to making a life-altering decision and lost our child. The problems that will come about are things that you'll never understand until you've been in the middle of it. But while we stayed together, again, neither married nor engaged, we never spoke about the abortion. We never spoke about our loss. We never spoke about what our future might become or how it might change. And then a couple of years later, in 1977, she decided that we were done and she was going down a different path than I was going to go. And so that I've now learned that a breakup of a couple after an abortion is very, very predictable. It's likely to happen more times than not. By January 78, I had rebounded myself into a marriage with a woman who, like myself, did not want children. And we stayed married for about 4 or 5 years or so. And we did not have a pregnancy between us. We just parted ways. Next several years I spent learning to be single again. During that time in 1984, a good thing happened. I met the woman who would become my second wife. That meeting was in December. It was on the 10th. It was a Monday morning. It was about 10:30. It was a wow moment for me. It was just one of those things that, wow, there we were. But as good as that was, I learned she had 3 children from her previous marriage. And I'm thinking, oh, man, I don't want to get in the middle of this. I'm still stuck with my I don't want children. And instant family didn't make sense. So we didn't even date until 88, some 4 years later. And I didn't meet her children for at least 4 or 5 months at her decision. She wanted to make sure that we were going to have some kind of future. And when I did meet her children, interesting enough, they were wonderful children. They were interesting, they were smart, they held conversations, polite. Go figure, kids turn out okay. In 89, I felt it was time to ask her to marry me, and her curious answer was not yes or no or maybe. It was to ask me again tomorrow. And I'm thinking, what kind of answer is that? Ask me tomorrow. So on April 2nd, I asked her again, and she said yes. We were married in June of 89. So she realized it was April Fool's Day. I had no clue. It was gone. So the regret part, from 75 to now 89, I lived in basically a dark period where I did not tell a soul that I had been involved in an abortion. So generally my discovery and regret began as late as 2006. At that time I was drinking heavily, being drunk most evenings, and had been doing so for quite some time, not realizing that it may have been tied right back to the abortion circumstances. And my wife of almost 18 years at that point said to me, and I quote this, "I don't want to live like this anymore." So while I tried to negotiate a way out of that and maybe drink half as much instead of whatever I was doing, that did not fly, which was fortunate for both of us. But it did cause me to go back to church after an absence of 25 years. And it also led me to stopping drinking cold turkey on July 5th, non-Independence Day, in 2006. And not because I wanted to, but I believe God stepped in and said, "You're done. Stop. Done." So if you've ever heard of Calvary Chapel in general and our specific one in Milwaukee, they are a Bible teaching church, and they begin at the front of the Bible in Genesis and go all the way through. And when they've done that, they start again. And that's the kind of environment that I attend 2 days a week, Sundays and Wednesdays. Had a big impact on my life and my studies. And while at the beginning of my recovery period from the abortion, it really began in earnest in February of that year. And now, keep in mind, this is 32 years afterwards, after my abortion, almost to the day. And it was 18 years into my marriage. I had kept that secret for 18 years from my wife. So after a few things occurred at church, including a week of prayer nights that taught me that prayer can be answered and it can be answered immediately, after hearing a new worship song from one of our leaders whose daughter had just been born, watching a video from the Portland Pregnancy Resource Centers about the Walk for Life, and actually that was 3 years ago tomorrow, so 3-year anniversary on that. I basically crashed emotionally, and it was time to find a solution. And as it turned out, one of the gentlemen in our parish, converting me slowly, in our church, seated very near me, it was the leader of a program called Healing a Father's Heart, which is offered through Portland Pregnancy Resource Center, along with a companion program for the women called Heart, Healing Encouragement for Abortion-Related Trauma. So he took me under wing right away and started explaining the process of how can I recover personally and move on. And I mentioned those two simply because while I'm an absolute fan of Rachel's Vineyard, and that's where I met these two gracious ladies, and I'm part of the team presenting, there are other programs available to men and women. And they were both excellent. They both lead into understanding God's love for each of us and God's forgiveness for each of us. And while waiting for that Healing a Father's Heart program to come along, which was going to be about a year, because they don't have enough men to fill programs, I kept looking on the internet and found Rachel's Vineyard, attended there in November of 2007 and again in 2009. And the reason for the second one was so I could, in fact, join the team as a full team member and help lead those retreat weekends. So in 2.5 years since my retreat, my calling has become doing exactly this, coming and speaking, and doing it on TV, doing it on radio, doing it in front of my own church, doing it where anybody will listen, basically. And the message is that both parents suffer and both parents have a need for healing. And trying to do the man thing and ignore the fact that I'm fine, I'll just walk it off, is not going to work. It's going to take a certain amount of years, in my case 30 plus, and I've met probably a dozen men who can say the same thing. 25 or more years ago I had an abortion and now I'm crashed, and what do I do to fix it? So with all that in mind, the message to go forward with is, if you're faced with that crisis decision, getting help in terms of counseling, not making a fast decision in the case of my Wednesday through Sunday, or otherwise Saturday through Wednesday, taking the time to understand what you're doing, because there's not a rewind, there's no do-over, it's done, it's gone. And I'm just happy I found my way to meet these folks and to have the studies and the opportunities I've had to both understand myself and the damage I did, as well as find a way to go forward and find healing. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and I know I see a lot of familiar faces out there, so it's nice to see you all. It was about 1980 to 1981, kind of hard to remember, I'm getting old, and I was in junior high, the last part of junior high. I was a huge athlete. I was on the A-team softball, I was on the A-team in tracks, basketball, everything. That's all I wanted to do. My parents had such high hopes that I would go through high school and get this athletic scholarship to the University of Arkansas so I could be where the Razorbacks are. That's a big deal in my family. So they had high hopes, real high hopes for my future. You know those towns that you hear about in the South where they have block parties, they make homemade ice cream, and everybody goes to church on Sunday and Wednesday, just like Graham does? Amen. That's where I came from. I came from that town in Arkansas, in Fort Smith. I grew up in a really good Christian home with 6 brothers and sisters and 2 wonderful parents. But one thing that was really important in our town was family reputation. In a small town, everybody knows everybody else, so it's real important to do the right thing, and if you don't, nobody else better find out. It's real important. So also in 1980 to 1981, I had sex for the very first time, and I became pregnant after one time, young people. That's real important to know. It only takes once. My parents were so devastated when I and my older sister sat down and spoke with them about it. You know, they thought, if I have a child, I'm not going to get to go to college, much less will I even finish high school. My reputation will be ruined. Their reputation would be ruined. You know, what would people say? What would they think? So they decided that it would be best for me to have an abortion. My mom made an appointment with our family GYN, who ironically delivered almost all of us, so that with my permission, he could kill my baby. And don't get me wrong, my mom is wonderful, and that's where a lot of people don't understand. Parents are scared, just like the girls are, just like the boys are. They're scared. They want to help their children, and that's why I'm out here. I want everyone to know it didn't help anything. It only creates a lifetime of problems and regret, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. After that day that I had my abortion, we never ever mentioned the word. We never discussed it. It was gone, period. You know, that's the way we did things. We move on. You know, there's no use in, dwelling in the past. Don't cry over spilt milk, as my mom would say. But not long after that, I became a different person. I became very depressed. I quit every sport, which everyone was shocked about. That was my whole life. It had been my entire life from 5 years old on. That's all I'd ever done. And I just wasn't interested anymore. It didn't drive me. I started getting D's and F's in school, where I wasn't a great student, but I at least got B's and C's without trying too hard. So, nothing really mattered anymore. And I didn't know why. I decided I would just get a job, go to school, go to work, just move on and try to get through high school. So I also started to rely on myself a lot and no one else for whatever reason, where before I had this real family tie and we were very close, After that, I felt like, I was kind of on my own. And I wasn't, but I felt that way. I moved out of my house the week I turned 18. I wasn't mad at anyone. I was just needed to get away. So I moved out, and after a few months, my mom and sister hadn't heard from me for a couple days. And even though we weren't that close, we would make a phone call every couple days. They were calling my house, just calling my friends. Have you seen Tamara? No. So they finally came out. I lived kind of out in the country. And when they got there, no one answered the door. And they finally decided they need to try to break in. So they broke in through a window or something. And what they found was me with both my wrists slit and blood everywhere. And the doctor said I was probably unconscious for a couple days. So I was just kind of lying there. I wasn't, dead, but I was close. And again, my family was really worried about what message that would send to the rest of the community. And they also were worried that if they took me to the hospital, that I might be institutionalized. We had a place there for teens like me, and that's where you usually had to go. It was called Harbor View, I remember. And so my mom was an LPN, so she decided they would just take me home. They dressed my wounds and kind of, took me out of the public eye for a while and just got better. But not long after that came the many, many sessions with psychiatrists and medication. I was taking so much medication and so many different kinds, I couldn't even hardly hold my head up. I was like a zombie. No one could figure out what was wrong with me. What happened all of a sudden? What happened to me? Nobody asked, did I have an abortion? Nobody ever mentioned that, and I certainly wasn't going to say it, ever. I became really impulsive after that also, and that's another one of the side effects is impulsivity. One day, I was 19, and I just went to the Air Force recruiting office and joined with no thought. I just decided, hey, I need to get out of here, and that's a good way, so I'll just go join. No thought about what I was doing. Luckily, it was a good thing, but I had no idea. I got married while I was in tech school to a boy I only knew a month, thinking that, okay, if I get married, then I'm going to be a normal person. I'm going to be a married person. I'm going to be respectable. That'll be good. But I had no idea anything about him. And so, needless to say, that lasted a very short time, and I think it ended with a restraining order and police. I mean, it was a nightmare. But I just couldn't make those decisions anymore. I really didn't have the right mental capacity to be able to do that. There were 3 more failed marriages after that. So that's 4, and I'm married now, so that's 5. So all the men that I married had different types of addiction, be it sexual, be it, alcohol, control, whatever it is. They all had addictions, and I was drawn to that, maybe because I felt I could help them. I don't really know, but needless to say, it didn't work. In 2000, I met my current husband, Ron, who, if you read my little bio in the what do you call it? Program, thank you. It says he was my angel, and he really was. I met him on the internet, which is also another very risky type of behavior and bad way to meet people. So just because I met him and it worked out, it's probably not normally a good idea. God was just giving me a little chance there, giving me a break. I dated him, but I also dated, if you can call it that, a lot of different men while I dated him the first few years. I was really promiscuous. He was probably the only person that didn't think I was supposed to go have sex with him after we went out. I mean, that just wasn't in his mind. But I also thought, he likes me a little too much, so I don't think I'll date him long. He knew there was something really sad and dark about me, but he was so patient because he also said he saw a light, which is really sweet. And I thought, okay, I don't know how he saw that. Then he brought me to the Catholic Church. I became Catholic in 2003 and married my husband that same year. I still don't have all my annulments, by the way, so my marriage is not blessed in the church, which is a real, concern, and I'm working on it. We struggled in our marriage for many years, just mostly due to me. My mood swings were horrible. There were times when I would just tell him I needed to leave, and I actually made him move out for 6 months. But he was, whatever I needed to do, that's what he worked on. I was always running away, but no matter where I went, the sadness was so heavy that it followed me. No amount of love or money could help me. And he had quite a bit of money at that time, but nothing helped. One night when my husband was out of town, I sat on the couch here in Portland, and I just cried. I didn't even know why, but I just couldn't stop crying. I got online because that's what I do, and I wrote an email to a priest I had heard about. I didn't know him because I certainly wouldn't tell a priest I knew this stuff, So I'd heard about him, and people said that he was really, really compassionate, and he actually was in a rock band. So I kind of felt like, okay, he's probably pretty normal. Maybe he won't just, push delete and hope he never hear from me again. So his name was Father John at St. Juan Diego. He's a wonderful, wonderful, compassionate man. He emailed me back and said, hey, I don't want to discuss this with you over the email. Why don't we make a face-to-face appointment and get together? I really want to talk to you. And I thought, oh, my gosh, I can't look at him now that I've told him all of these horrible things. What will he think? So I did make an appointment. I knew I needed to. So I wore, something up to my neck, and I looked very, very conservative and very motherly so that he wouldn't think I was awful. And we sat down and we talked about all of the different problems that I'd have. But the first thing that I said was that, when I was 14 or 15, I had an abortion. And that I just kind of said that real fast, and moved on. And then I told him all the things that happened after that. And he said, you know what? I really think there may be something to that abortion. And I said, oh, that was a long time ago. Look at all these other problems. That was small. These are huge. And he goes, no, but I really think that there's something to that. And I want to give you this brochure. And I just want you to think about going on one of these retreats and calling, Lori at Rachel's Vineyard. And I was thinking, I don't go on retreats. That's not me. I'm not really comfortable with that. I don't want to sit around and do, little exercises and things like that. That's just not me. But I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that brochure. And I thought about it. And I called and I did make an appointment. The woman that I met on the phone was Lori. And, when I first talked to her on the phone, it really scared me because I was actually at a nail appointment, and she called me, and I knew we had set a time to call, but I wasn't prepared. And I went out to the outside of the nail salon, and she was asking me all these questions that were pretty personal, and I couldn't even say the word abortion, much less talk about it. And she was just asking me some questions, trying to see where I was. And anyway, we decided, I'm going to fill out the paperwork, I'm going to go. And then I canceled because I got sick, supposedly. And I really, really thought that I could just move on, and Lori would never call me back. She wouldn't bother me anymore, and I don't have to do this. I'll just try to fix this on my own. Well, she called me back right before the next retreat and asked me to go. And I said I would, and I was terrified, absolutely terrified. I cried a lot that weekend for my lost baby, but I also laughed with women that had been through even more than I had. We could finally all talk about what we had held in for so many years and actually grieve for our children and ask God to take care of them. I never understood God's limitless mercy for me and for all of us until that weekend at Rachel's Vineyard. It was a new beginning, a really fresh start. Here's a woman who could hardly keep anything together in her life, and I'm now pretty confident, unimaginably happy, strong marriage. I've lost 60 pounds. I try to help other women that are going through the same things that Graham, I, and Lori have been through, and men, by the way. I don't mean to leave them out, Graham. Sorry. I put together prayer vigils. I stand on street corners and hold up signs that say I regret my abortion. A lot's changed in my life. If you knew me before today, you'd never believe it was the same person. And my mother, who took me to that abortion, suffered her entire life. Suffered. But the week before she died, we sat down and we talked. And she cried. And she apologized and said, I'm sorry I ruined your life. But she didn't. And she had her pastor come, and she told him, and she's not Catholic, and she always laughed that we go to confession. And then she did it. She had her pastor come, and they talked, and they prayed, and she got to die, knowing that she was going to go to the right place. But it ruined her entire life, which affected all my brothers and sisters. It affected all the grandchildren. So it's very widespread. If it weren't for the grace of God in Rachel's Vineyard, I honestly can't imagine where my life would be or if I would even be alive today. Thank you for listening. God bless.
What you've been hearing about is the human condition. What happens when something so unnatural, like abortion, happens to one of us? We don't know how to cope. And so all those symptoms and descriptions are about the trauma of abortion and about unresolved grief. And the grief is very complex. It takes a lot to heal from it. And that's the beauty of Rachel's Vineyard Retreat. It's a process that focuses on all the woundedness, all the wounded areas in a person's life, and helps to restore them, restore to God, to their children, to themselves, and to others, which is what it takes to heal, those areas of reconciliation to God, to themselves, to their children, and to others. Rachel's Vineyard is therapy for the wounded heart and soul, and is rooted in the Lord Jesus Christ. The primary emphasis on the weekend is entering and moving through grief, recognizing and dealing with anger, mourning the lost child, the renewal of a spiritual life through the living scripture exercises, and developing a spiritual relationship with the aborted children. There are meditations and rituals that reveal God's compassion and forgiveness and invite repentance and reconciliation. Every exercise and scripture and ritual provides an opportunity for the women and men who attend the weekend to experience restoration through Christ and through the loving and accepting group. Anyone is welcome at these retreats, whether they're a grandmother, a friend, a sister, someone who drove another person to the abortion clinic. Anyone that's been impacted by abortion is welcome to come. I'm supposed to tell my story too. I got a little bit of time, but my abortion happened here in Oregon, and I was born and raised in Cottage Grove, and my dad was a public school administrator, a public school teacher, and so image too was very important. And I was pregnant at age 15, as near as I can tell, because one of the symptoms, the after effects of something traumatic, in this case abortion, is you try to forget it. And I tried to bury all of the memories that I could about it. So I'm actually not really sure about those details, but the abortion happened when I was 16, I think. And it happened before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. And so in that time, before Roe versus Wade legalized abortion nationally, different states had legalized abortion, and they'd have certain conditions. And they were always an easy out for the conditions. In this case, it was that the doctor would sign a paper that said that somehow I would be adversely affected if I didn't have the abortion. That it was in my best interest to have the abortion. So this happened in Eugene, and it was an OBGYN, and it happened in a hospital clinic. And I just remember pieces of it. I remember that I knew nothing. Zip, zilch, nothing. And I just wanted it to be over with. I wanted to forget it. I wanted to normalize things with my parents and just move on with my life. So it seemed like a quick fix. And in the position I'm in now, where I've heard of hundreds of stories that come through these retreats, that is still the final reasoning that people use. I just want it to be over with. I want to undo it. So I always challenge people, particularly young people, just give me one example of how you can undo anything in life, and then we'll talk. Because for some reason we believe that. It's the fear and the confusion and that pressure that I was talking about earlier. But that was my case. And so I had my abortion and went back to school, but my life declined rapidly. And I lived in a lot of shame, and I thought that would be over with afterward, and it wasn't. And so I got into a little bit of drinking, tried a few drugs, did some things that just treating myself poorly. And then thankfully I married a Catholic at that time, so I had an opportunity to be in a good atmosphere and a good faith-filled atmosphere. And so that part was good in itself. However, I carried all my baggage into our marriage, and it was extremely difficult, my relationship with him, as well as in the way I raised my children and how I perceived myself, my own self-image. So I was very wrong in my perception, my foresight of what I thought would happen if I was to have this abortion. So God, in His mercy, worked through. He's very clever, you know. He works through these ways, and you think, oh, that's really unique. I began to homeschool, and when I homeschooled, we used a Catholic curriculum, and then I began to learn my faith, really learn my faith, and that's when I started to develop this pro-life awareness and the beauty of life in general and all the gifts of God through to human beings. And it was around that time that I also went to a fair, county fair. And so any of you that are involved in county fairs, I just want to reassure you and encourage you to keep doing it, because I went to a fair booth and there was all sorts of brochures and so forth to pick up. But I had 5 small children, so I'm sure that I was in a flurry in there and get out, don't touch anything, let's get up here. But I picked up something because I got home with it, and it was months later that I finally had the time to look at one of the brochures, and I opened it up, and it was a picture of an aborted baby. And that's when I was struck with the horror of what I had done. And that's when I felt undone. And that's when I wanted to cry, and I wanted to scream, and I didn't know what to do. It's right in the middle of my whole life going on around me. I didn't have a place to go to deal with it. But that's the reality. That's the truth. And I chose to pick up that brochure, and I chose to open it and look at that picture. And so that, I believe, was God's hand in guiding me. Then I went on to volunteer for a Right to Life group that started in Cottage Grove, where I still am, and got involved there. Slowly began to tell people and to open up about my story. I still felt a lot of shame. And then I volunteered for First Way, which is a pregnancy support center in Eugene. I learned more there. And it was there that we discovered Rachel's Vineyard, because it was just happening on the East Coast. Our director said, we need to find out about this. Is this a good resource? And somebody should find out. And she looks at me and one other woman. So she said, we'll send you and you. And so we went back to Lubbock, Texas, and experienced the retreat. And part of my symptom was, over the years, was to numb down and not have a lot of emotions. So 28 years after my abortion, I cried about 28 years worth of tears on that weekend. And at first, I was very afraid of losing control, because that's also one of the things. I've lost control in the past. Everything's got to be in control. And after I was able to release that through the beauty and the effectiveness of the retreat process, then I was able to freely cry and grieve the loss of my son, and to be able to put my life back together again. So it was like a rebirth in ways. And ever since then, I came back from that retreat, and I thought, somebody ought to start these in Oregon. We'll wait till we can find somebody who can do it. I'm still waiting. So the Lord in His patience, and everybody who comes, and they're very grateful. So, and I'm very grateful. So that's my story, and that's about the retreats and about the ministry, and we continue to go on very strongly. And so if you ever need to talk to somebody about abortion, we're there for you. Thank you. She was asking about other resources that are not limited to the weekend format, and it depends on where they're at. But one of the very popular healing programs is using a booklet called Forgiven and Set Free, and that's done on a weekly basis. And almost every crisis pregnancy center, I'm assuming, will offer something for post-abortion healing. It's done along that line. And I recommend that everybody that goes through the retreat continue to look for more resources to continue healing. So let's say she did this now, one of your friends did this now, came to a retreat later. So I just think they're very good. Well, Graham talked about that. He did both types. And so they do have to go through me at a certain point. But if you're approaching your friend, any of your friends, normalizing their feelings and what they're going through is really important, because they're going to feel, what's wrong with me? And they have been struggling with it on some level of awareness since their abortion. What's wrong with me? And so they're always trying to compensate, like we've been hearing. So just saying, I heard these stories of people, and it made me sad for you, and I was wondering, you don't try to project it onto them, but I'm feeling sad for you. I'm concerned about you. I would really like things to be different for you, if you would like them to be different. Well, I think coming at it from the grief and trauma aspect again, just saying, I went to this conference and I heard this, or I become more aware. You don't even have to talk about the conference if you don't want to, because sometimes that can set up barriers, but just that I've been learning more about trauma and unresolved grief and some of the symptoms, and also that most people keep that a secret and hidden, and they suffer in silence. And so, you're taking a risk no matter what you do. But your risk is that you're going to help them, even if initially they don't receive it, with open arms. It'll be a gift from God to them eventually, because your message brings hope. That's the underlying thing. When you're thinking about what you're going to say, how am I going to bring hope to this person? Oh. Women that are in that crisis situation, the best thing to do is find out what their crisis point is. What's their most greatest fear that they're dealing with that's making them walk through that door? Boyfriend, whatever. You're just guessing, but that's the deal. So that's your message to them, is there is another way. Feminists for Life says, crisis pregnancies are not a dead end, just a detour. So that's what you're trying to help those kids to figure that out.